So, today we're gonna talk about how to play Brawl into Double Bubble. I think a lot of people have issues with how to play playing Brawl into Double Bubble. They sort of don't fully understand the win conditions very well. So that's what we're gonna focus on. Okay. There are like basically the way I look at this is there are essentially like three things, right, that you sort of need to keep in mind in neutrals. Let's use a different color here. Let's use red. The first thing, right, is so in general when you're playing Brawl versus Double Bubble, right? With Brawl, the whole concept is you want to be able to pressure the Winston and force the Winston out. If the Winston is not forced out, the Winston will essentially block your heals, and if your core, if your Ryan, your Zarya push forward, and there's a Winston in your backline, your supports can't heal your Ryan just dies, right? He gets split and he just dies. So in general, I'm going to break down the macro things based off sort of how to deal with Winston and sort of how you're supposed to react, or ways you can react, right? I don't want to say this is the only way to play the game, right? I want to give you options, and I sort of want you as a player, as a team, to sort of understand, what to do in different situations. Okay. So the first thing, right, is if Winston jumps in, right? What you should look to do, right, if you're stabilizing, you're sort of chilling, right, is you should look to live for a second, and preferably live out of the bubble. Okay. Force the Winston out. And then push. Okay. Now, the reason for this, right, is when the Winston jumps in, he's going to get Zarya bubble. He's going to use that a lot. And, burning that is, you could do it if you really wanted to, especially if the Zarya's high charge already. But it's still difficult because when you burn the Zarya bubble, the Winston's going to use his own bubble, right? So the general concept is Winston jumps in, right? Start backing up, right? Let the Winston Zarya bubble go, let the Winston's actual bubble go, play out of that bubble, right? Winston can't overextend out of that bubble because if the Winston does, he has no shield and he probably will die, right? Unless he has nano or primal. So bait him outside that bubble. Once you're outside the bubble, so I'll give a visual example. We'll sort of use this as just an example over here. Team is sort of playing, let's say, like over here. Okay. The Winston jumps in on your team. He puts a bubble down like this. What your team should do is back up, okay, and play sort of as green now. Right now, the Winston, right, who's sort of in this side here, right, for him to do get to your team now, he sort of has to leave the bubble, right, and like that sucks for him. And if he does that, it allows your team to sort of pressure him and force him out. Or punish him and kill him. Okay. The other really big concept about this, right, and I'm not gonna go too much into it right now, but if you realize there's actually a corner here. So by you playing corners, right, you can basically set up the Winston or bait the Winston to get out of the Ana's LOS. The Ana's over here, right? The Ana's healing the Winston, right? The Winston jumps in aggressively. If your team backs up correctly, right, your team backs up, right, like plays really far back, and you bait that Winston essentially in bait that Winston like more forward and whatnot, then that Ana can no longer heal the Winston, and it's easier for you to punish him as well. Okay. Alright, so let's go back to the main topics. So that's the first concept, right? The next one, okay, is if you can just pressure, if you know where the Winston is, right? Like, because you should be scouting, right? I'm not gonna go too much into scouting, but you should be scouting. If you know where the Winston is, wait, if you can pressure Winston out, right? And what I mean by pressure out normally means you sort of force him to jump out. Force him to jump out, then you can just rush on the enemy team. Because now longer is that Winston going to be a pressure to your pressure to your backline, and the only reason why your team can't really push in is because they're scared of a Winston and splitting your team up. So if you pressure Winston out, right, first, then he jumps out, you can push the enemy team and they can't do anything. Okay. The last thing, and I have some good examples of this, if their Winston is sort of in like Narnia, right, like really, really, really far away from like the rest of their core, like Narnia with respect to like their team. And I'll give you an example again, right? You can essentially say, you know what, we don't have to worry about that Winston, right? He's so far away. You can just sort of int on the enemy team. The enemy 4. Okay. So let me give you some examples of all of this. Okay. So we're gonna watch this. There's some really good examples of stuff, fundamentals here. Let's see here. Play it out. So the Winston's going left, right. The core's on going high ground. The tracer's behind. I wish they fixed this 2x thing. It's still a bug, so I can't go faster. So McCree kills the tracer, right? The team's up 1, right? It doesn't matter what SR this is. What matters is the concept and the logic, right? So now the blue's up 1, right? But what they could do is they could push in, right? And that's risky. Why? Because if they pushed in, whoops. If they push this over here in tech. There we go. If they pushed in, right, the Winston then could jump up, right? So before they even pushed in, the first thing they should have asked themselves is, where's the Winston, right? And if they see the Winston jump out, sure, the Winston jumped out. Winston doesn't have jump, we can push in, right? And now they're running in, they're sort of pushing the core, right? But now again, what they do? So they pushed in here, they got 2 kills, plus the tracer technically plus 3 right now, right? The Winston jumps in. The first thing that should happen immediately is these 2 guys should back up and try and live. Like, everyone should be playing to live and play behind the bubble. They should not be overextending like this, because this makes it very hard for the BAP to heal, right? BAP's forced to lamp now. If these guys just stabilize right over here, lamp happens over here, they backed up, they pressured Winston out, right? Lucio may have lived. He was really low. He may have lived. Ryan definitely would have lived. Because now Ryan overextends, right? And he dies. And in this situation, they still end up winning the fight, right? But the concept's still there where it's very risky. Okay? I'll give you another example. I think it was on attack. Oh, I did it perfectly. Okay, so another perfect example. Oop, a little too far. They're rotating in, okay? This is a very famous, double bubble defense, right? The attacking team is going to rotate in, the defensive team is going to jump up, right? Mainly the Winston from normally over here. Correction, like over here, he's going to jump up while the attacking team is rotating. So what should happen, right, is, I'm not gonna go too much into this, but I'll quickly talk about the Mei. The Mei strat is you wall the Winston off, right? My other personal favorite is running Tracer, keeping Tracer somewhere over here and hidden in the Mega, because when the Winston jumps up, he's obviously gonna stabilize someone down here. That's just normal. And then when the Winston stabilizes, he's low, Tracer just follows up, kills the Winston. It's like a bait type of play. But so they rotate, right? And they see the Zarya, they don't look at the Winston jumps in, right? And you're gonna see what happens right over here. It splits the team. Right? And now this BAP back here, right, can't heal the team, right? The team keeps pushing forward, right? The Zarya didn't even save bubble for the BAP, which you obviously should in this situation, right? And they now, we're hoping that's, the BAP player lives. And versus a good team, right? Obviously, this team is being very aggressive and they're running Zen Ana because they know the enemy team is playing Brawl, which makes sense, right? Hell, they could even probably run a Mercy if they wanted to with like an Echo, right? But the concept is that Discord could go on BAP and then he could just easily just die. Right? So it's very, very, very risky. And they end up managing to pull it off. Okay. So those were both sort of examples, right, of the first thing, right? Those should have given very clear examples of if the Winston jumps in, you want to live, right? Now let me give you an example of number 3, because I remember another example of that. I believe it was over on attack. Or defense. Let's see here. Recap here. Let's go back a bit more. Okay, so this is a very good example. So the core is over here, right? This far side, and the Winston is over here. In this situation, if you just logically think about this, right? If you know the Winston's over here, right? This Winston, right, to actually join and group up with his core, has to cover a lot of distance. He has to walk all the way up here, then maybe jump, right, and then pinch with the Zarya for that to happen, right? That takes a lot of time. Obviously, yes, you could jump from here all the way over here, right? But then if you guys, if the defensive team pushes on these guys over here, then the Winston then has to walk again from here all the way to there. So the concept here is, hey, their Winston's really far away from their core, right? I know the Winston's there. Let's just quickly speed and run at the Zarya, right? So the concept here should be the Winston's far, right? He's in Narnia, right? Let's just immediately, we realize that, let's just immediately run on their core. right? So it's a little slow in scouting, right? Like the point where the Winston is actually able to get to this close. But even then, if you think about it, this Winston can only like jump up here, right? He can't jump here, right? So if you speed boost to yellow, right, that Winston's essentially going to be useless for a bit. Okay, so that was sort of wrong here. Okay. And eventually, like, they force the Winston out, sort of, and then they sort of push forward, and then they end up getting a massive shadow, and they win. Okay. One other concept I sort of want to talk about. Okay. So let's say, like, in general, the Winston was like right over here, like right under here, right? And you know the team was pushing like this. Or I got a better idea. Let's explain it this way. Let's say they're attacking. Where's the attack? Perfect. Okay. So this is exactly here. It's a neutral fight, aka you know there's no beat, there's no ultimates. But let's say they do have ultimates. Let's say you do have beat here. Let's say you do have square or something. Okay. Now, in general, the rule number 1, right, says that, hey, when we rotate, right, we need to always carry the Winston, and if the Winston jumps in, right, we should, turn around, like peel our backline, right, back up out of the bubble and like help our backline. But there are situations, right, and this is one of the edge situations. There's probably a few more too, but these are the basic ones. If you've got square or beat, right, and you sort of want to say, you know what, I don't care about that Winston, right, I want to int on this Zarya that's like right over here. Right, I wanna kill this Zarya right over here. So if that Winston jumps in, I'm gonna beat us, right? And we're just gonna run at the Zarya. And then after we kill the Zarya, we're gonna turn around and pressure the Winston, right? So that's sort of like a very basic concept. You can use ultimates, right, to set tempo. And instead of like playing more reactionary, you can be more aggressive. But you have to understand that you're using those ults that way, right? Obviously, if they have grav, right, and like you have beat, you might want to think about saving the beat for grav. So you need to be a bit smart about it. Okay. And number 2, I'm just going to give a very hypothetical example. Let's say you're just on defense here, right? And you sort of see the Winston, like, walking up again, like maybe like over here, and you start poking at him and you force him to jump out like here. Then you can say, oh, cool, the Winston's out. Maybe you just, again, run into these guys over here that are maybe high ground, the attacking team. The attacking team's core is over here. Okay. So that's an example of like, pressuring the Winston out, forcing him to jump. Okay. Cool. So that's like the basics, right? The 3 like macro basics. Okay. Now the next thing I want to talk about is sort of like positioning, right? Because I think a lot of people have issues with actually understanding like positioning. So let me get back to my whiteboard here. Oh, let's scroll down. Whoops. Okay, positioning. Okay, so when you think positioning, right, the first thing you sort of want to think about, right, is thank you for the sub. You want to be thinking about using corners, right? And if you remember really early on, I talked about why corners are so good is because you can basically bait people out of the backline's LOS. But there's other reasons for that, and we'll talk about why in a second, right? But corners essentially also allow you to stabilize. So allows you to stabilize. Okay. So your Ryan can chill. It also allows you to poke. And I'll talk about why that's really good. So let me give you examples of both of these, okay? A very basic level. So if anyone would go back and sort of watch some really old videos about BRAWL, right? I talked about 3 different situations, and I'm going to do them really fast, okay? The first situation is corners to open space to corners. The next situation is corners to corner. And the last one is corner to open space. Okay. Well, one of the biggest advantages you have with BRAWL versus, double bubble is the fact that, you have a shield. You have a shield. They don't really have a shield. The other advantage is you've got speed, obviously, right? But these are like 2 very inherent advantages you need to understand. Okay. Now we're gonna use the fact that you've got shield and like amplify that and that knowledge. Okay, with the fact of understanding these 3 principles of corners. So I'll quickly define them. Okay. So the first one, corner to corner, very straightforward, is in situations where you have a corner. So there's a corner. So let's get it clear. You have a corner, like x1, maybe like team 1. Let's preferably not use variables here. Let's say team 1, right? Defending team, and then the attacking team is another corner, right? You're both playing corners. Another example, right, could be corner to open space to corner, right? So this is a corner for one team, that's a corner for another team, right? So the attacking team is playing over here, defending team is playing over here. Okay. Now let's talk about corners to open space, right? And this is like the biggest one. Why? Because when you have a corner and the enemy team is in open space, right, you can essentially just spam them. You can just you can shoot them for free, and they're forced to use CDs, right? And I'll actually give my favorite example. It'll take a second to open up, but this is legitimately my favorite example, and I always tell teams to do this, especially if they have ultimates too. 1 second. So on Oasis, jump pad, which is university. I forgot the name, but Oasis jump pad. Okay. Essentially, what you can do is you can quote unquote spawn hold. Let's remove that for now. Let's make this bigger. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, so here, what you can essentially do, right, is you can play this corner, right? And when the enemy team is coming out of spawn, right, and they're rotating in, there are very few corners for them to play. Very, very few. So what you could do is you can literally have your whole team stack right on this corner and just start spamming them, right? And if you wait, right, if you wait for them to get out of corners, right, so you wait for them maybe to walk into more open area, like preferably like or somewhere around here, right? Instead, if you do it really early, what they'll do is they'll just bolt this way. So you wait a little bit, let them walk out a bit in open space and start spamming them really hard, right? You could force CDs, you could force bubble, like Winston bubble, you could force Zarya bubble, you could force amp, maybe packs, you could force nade, right? And that's huge because you're forcing CDs for free, right? Or maybe they have to use an ult to take space. Maybe they nano Winston and jump at you and you just sort of back up, right? So the concept sort of is that you have a shield, right? You can't take as much poke. They don't have a shield, right? And you're able to poke them for free. So you need to be greedy and aggressive, right? You need to be greedy and aggressive and understand these situations on different maps where you can sort of just say, hey, I want to poke this corner, right? Like, and a very basic reason why I'm also saying this is when you look at this composition here, let's get back Epic Pen. Where'd you go? Oh, there it is. When you look back at this composition, let's look at how much poke you have, okay? In this situation, you have McCree, Mei, and Bap. That's 3 people. That's pretty decent. I'd even say Lucio can poke a little bit too, right? The enemy team, right? This is weird because they have an Ana, right? They pretty much have McCree, Ana, Zen, and you can sort of say Tracer, okay? So, you know, you have roughly the same amount of poke. I'd say you have more technically, but you have a shield. They don't. Hence, again, you're going to poke them out more, and you're going to force CDs first. So let me give you sort of an example here, right? And the reason why I said here could be really strong, right, is if your team plays this bus here, and you want to sort of play slowish, right, and the enemy team is attacking, they have to push into you. They have to walk up to push the cart. Maybe the cart's like over here. Okay, I can use a different color for the cart. The cart's over here, right? They have to push the cart. What you could do is wait, just wait for a few seconds. Wait for the enemy team to sort of get somewhere like over here, preferably, right? Why? Because if you start shooting them over here, they'll just go in this room. And if you want to split them up like that, that's fine too, right? But you want to start shooting them really early, right? Like as soon as they're sort of at places where they can't kite, there's no corners. You shoot them over here, they could kite over here too, right? You shoot them over here, they could kite over here. The benefit of this also shooting early is guess what? The enemy team may not kite together. They might send, you know, like 3 people here. They might send 3 people over here. And guess what? Then you can be like as BRAWL, hey, they're splitting, they're low resources. Let's push into them. And you speed in, right? Now, note this comp has Mei, right? At a higher level, let's say, or not a higher level, just if you want to play Tracer instead, right? You could run Tracer here. And now, if you're, you know, sort of smart on Tracer and you understand, hey, you know what? We're going to poke them really early. As Tracer, you understand, okay, we're going to poke them really early, right? My core is here. We're shooting them. We're going to shoot them really early. Their enemy team is probably going to like kite into some of these situations, areas over here, maybe in there, right? So as Tracer, you say, okay, cool. I know they're going to kite in these areas. I'm going to maybe set up in this room, or I'm going to set up on the side here, right? And as soon as they kite, I'm going to push them, right, and pressure them, right? And your BAP can still heal the Tracer a bit at range. Even though you don't have like, you know, Pack or Harmony Orb, you can still pull it off, right? And this is sort of like you're baiting them into an area and your Tracer already knows where it is. Okay, so this is like being really smart. Okay, but the biggest thing I want to really emphasize here is using corners to like pressure them and force resources early. Like poke them hard. Do not let the enemy team take space for free. Make it very hard for them. Make it hard for that Winston to close distance. Okay. And the other reason why corners are also good, like we said, is you can, if you back up right, if they do engage on you first, you can bait them out of on LOS. Okay. So I want to give another example, really fast. Well, I want to talk about two things. Two more really big macro things, and I'm sort of talking about a lot of different concepts because, you know, hopefully it's helpful. When you're essentially looking to push into the enemy team, right? When you think of Brawl, right? Like if you look at like the things I mentioned earlier, like the first thing, right, where you're sort of like waiting for them to jump on you, right? That's sort of like very much playing second or playing like reactive, right? And the second thing, right, is where like you pressure the Winston out and then you push in. That's like playing first, right? Like playing really aggressive if you find opportunities, right? The other one is like Winston's in Narnia, right? Like, you know, and then you sort of push in because he's in Narnia. That's also playing first, right? Let's give some more options to like maybe play first if you want to, right? Or maybe play second. So one of the other really big options is essentially what everyone does is sort of just run it down. Right? Like brain dead, running it down. Now, I'm going to give you more logic into actually how to run it down. Because just straight up running it down, right, can work, but versus very good teams, you'll get baited. And I'll explain why in a second. So running it down with sort of actually some logic and like thinking. Okay? And the other one is what I like to call is setting up the backline. Okay, so let's look at the first concept of running it down. Okay, where did, all right, let's go here. So let's look at attack. I think there's a pretty good example that I can use here on attack. The cap here. Okay, so when I think running down, right, I think you're trying to kill someone instantly, right? And obviously when you're trying to kill someone instantly, the biggest thing you want to realize is, hey, let's try and go for non-mobile targets. If you go up for Winston, he just jumps away. If you go on Tracer's just going to blink away. So you want to go on targets that are sort of like easy to kill because they won't run away, right? Makes sense. But there's more to that, right? And at a really high level, people who play double bubble understand that, you know, oh, you know, as Ana, as Zen, you know, I need to play like really far away, otherwise the enemy team is going to run at me, right? And, you know, what they normally try and do in double bubble is they say, you know what, if the Brawl team is able to actually run at me and kill me as Ana, or like the time it takes, right, for the Brawl team to run at me, in that time it takes and the distance, my team is going to kill them in that time. And I'll give you an example, like literally with this. So for example, you see here, right? This team is going to look to like push all the way around here and look to maybe push, right? And like maybe and get on someone, preferably the Ana, who will probably rotate from, you know, here to there, okay? In this rotation, right, this Winston, right, has like two opportunities to cleave at the team. We'll call it like X1, right, is the first cleave opportunity. The second one's like maybe over here, right? And there might be a third one if they, you know, the fight goes to point, okay? But the concept is as this rotation is super long, there's multiple chances, right, for double bubble to get picks off rotation. And how are they getting these picks? Well, it's very simple. They're getting a picks off angles. Angles, right? And also like maybe splitting focus. They split focus, they maybe like drive the Brawl team to not play together, maybe, right? And then like help each other out. So the biggest thing is when you're rotating, right, you're always scared of angles, right? You're always scared of angles. And I'm going to take this out, and we should be running Diva here. This is wrong. Let's do the color here so you can actually see it. Running Diva. Okay, so when you're rotating, right, really long rotation, especially in an open space, should always be scared of angles. You should always understand is what are your threats. What are the range threats that threaten you? And if you look at the Brawl, if you look at the double bubble comp, right, straight up, you should be able to see that, hey, these range threats are what? McCree, you know, Ana, Zen, right? Like these are the range threats. Maybe the enemy team has an Echo, right? Range threat with a Mercy Pocket, right? So you need to understand when you're rotating now, you need to make sure that you're denying these range threats while living and getting on your end goal, which is maybe the Ana, the Zen, whatever it is. Maybe it's forcing point for some reason, right? So the way to do this, right, is you rotate And as you rotate, right, you assign people to deal with certain threats. So again, this is a diva. So let's just play this out and I'll show you what I mean. So the enemy team is rotating, right? They rotate up high ground. Very, very clear rotation. The enemy Winston sort of messed up. Happens, right? They see the Zarya here, right? And they go. They Maywall, great Maywall, right? They could drop on the Zarya and kill the Zarya, right? But what I'll say to this is it's risky, right? If they drop it on the Zarya, what happens? They get susceptible by angles. The Tracer will come behind them. The Ana will shoot. The McCree will shoot, right? And then the Zarya may not even die because there's a trance there, right? So, they go to point and all of a sudden they have no cover anymore and they're sort of stuck there in open space, right? And they're susceptible to getting webbed, as some of you might know, right? So instead, what should be happening, right, is people should keep pushing, right, on a target that they want while they're holding space. And while this is happening, right, it's really important people deal with angles. So what I mean by that is, oh, there's a Tracer behind? Well, our Lucio should sort of watch that Tracer, right? Our Lucio should sort of watch the Tracer coming behind, right? Oh, the enemy team has maybe the Kree's not even here. Maybe there's an Ashe. The Ashe is over here and shooting you guys, right? While you're rotating, right? Well, while this yellow line's happening, right? Somewhere in the middle here, the diva sort of flies and pressures the Ashe. Okay, right? The diva can fly and do that. And the biggest thing to realize is, so what you're seeing is the core pushes together, right? So the team pushes as sort of a unit, right, to a target. But in the middle, you'll sort of sometimes see people splitting off, right, to deal with angles and to soft, not just kill them, but to pressure them out, right? And the people who are doing that are the mobile people, right? So again, the diva, right, will maybe go on an Ashe or maybe an Echo or maybe something else, right? The Lucio will deal with the Tracer, right? Maybe if you had a Tracer here instead of a Mei, right? Then maybe the Tracer would go on maybe maybe pinch with you and go on the backline. Or maybe the Tracer would mirror if they had a Tracer. No, you have a Tracer. Something else. You could mirror something else essentially, right? Maybe you could watch the Winston. If the Winston jumps in, right? Your team shoots him, he jumps away, Tracer, you double blink, and you kill the Winston, right? But now what's important is we don't want too many people doing this, right? Because we need to still make sure that our front line, or the people that we want to go chase that Ana and kill that Ana, are still there, right? And if we have sort of a Ryan, right, and Ashe, again, it should really be McCree, but if we have a McCree, Ryan, and then a BAP all together, right? And we're moving together to kill something, that's still really strong. Right, that's still quite, it's quite a force, and you should be able to kill one target with that, right? And if you have a Mei with that too, you should definitely be able to kill the target. So this is sort of the concept of pushing together, right? But then in the middle, right, when you're getting pressured by angles because you're going into open space, your team sort of splits up and deals with angles correctly. Okay. I want to give you another example of this that was done in Owl. By Paris, and they did it very well. I saw this in the very hard part to see, but I saw this and I literally was clapping my hands because amazed, oh, mwah, is actually beautiful. Okay, so this point is very, very hard for Boston to deal with, or Paris to deal with. Why? Because if you think about it, just logically, Uprising has two high grounds, right? They pretty much have control of verticality because of these three people. Right, these guys are really far in Narnia, so the BRAWL team has to look to get on these guys, right? While they're rotating, right? Same concept. While they're rotating to get on, the Honor Brig Zarya that's in Narnia, they're gonna get pushed by these guys, right? So now it's this concept of, okay, these guys need to push, right? But some people need to be able to go, deal with threats. Okay, and how they do this is they do it, and this is not a neutral fight, there's alts in play, so they use alts to help them do this. Okay, and we're going to watch how they do that. Let's see here. Okay, so over here, right, you sort of see them push in. The diva soft pushes the high ground, right? Just a little bit of pressure, drops back down. Now what happens here is the Ryan takes space, right? And as soon as the Ryan, as soon as Dan takes space, right, you have to realize that he takes pressure. People will shoot his shield. He will take pressure. But if Oni got high noons, right, and I wish Oni got was a bit more further up, especially because they're pressured over here. But if Oni got high noons, that forces enemy team to back up. That forces these guys to back up. It forces these guys to sort of back up in an essence, right? So there's less pressure on Dans, which then means, guess what? Hey, there's less pressure on Dans. Okay, cool. As Diva, Lucio, BAP, even Mei to some extent, you don't need to be stacked on the Ryan right now. You can do something else. And what's it something you can do? Well, hey, you know that the enemy team is abusing these high grounds, right? Like this high ground over here, this high ground over here. Well, what you can do is you can send a little kill squad to go push that, right? So for example, you'll see in a second, you'll see Elivote, you'll see the Diva, you'll see the Lucio, and the Bap all together as a little high ground, little kill squad. They're ready to fight, right? And they'll push that high ground and they'll catch Valentine there who's trying to go for an off angle because Valentine, IM37, they know that they can't play main. They can't look at the Ryan, because they're going to high newt, right? So essentially, he looks for an angle to get value, which he does right now, you'll see. And as soon as like that happens, right? Because they know that as Brawl, you lose to angle. So if we use high noon, let's clear these high grounds, then we can push forward, right? So like they go up here, they kill the Echo, that high ground's now cleared, right? Like the Paris doesn't have to worry about that high ground anymore. There's still a high ground over there, right? And that's great. They make a mistake here though, and they say, hey, you know what? Let's push up this high ground and keep going when they should have just stabilized for 1 second. They should have waited for 1 second. Why? Diva doesn't have fly, right? Like Lucio was probably in the high ground. Bap was doing something. They waited for just 1 second, right? This ball also came in, right? They could have pressured someone else out, killed that person, then made a rotation. But they sort of went a little too early. They still almost end up winning this fight. Right, but the problem is, you see the Mei Ryan sort of by themselves a little bit, and the Mei dies. Onigod still gets 2, right? They beat forward, right? They're getting a lot of kills. Unfortunately, I think they end up losing the ebb and flow, right? But that's sort of the concept, right? Is, you can use ultimates like McCree ult or even Square to force pressure off your Reinhardt and then have your little kill squad go pressure people on the sides. Okay, let's put this back here. Take that. Let's get my notes. Okay, the other example I want to talk about, and we're going to skip a little bit more up forward. So one of the basic concepts, right? Like you guys understand running it down, right? It's pretty straightforward. Just run into them, kill them, right? And that's one option you can always do, right? For example, the enemy team is up here, right? And you sort of want to just sort of go up high ground. You want to run into them and kill them, right? Sure, right? The problem that makes it scary, right, is when you do this, you essentially give up the entire map. Right, you're essentially saying, okay, if we do this right, we don't own any of this map. We don't own any of this. All this other space is all yours, right? So, and you have to go through this choke area or like cleave area where the enemy team is going to cleave you, and you need to hope to like keep going and push through to kill the targets, right? If they're over here, they technically should be over here, right? But you're gonna have to make that rotation again. And that's fine. Like this can definitely work, right? Especially if you have like beat, right? Or like, you can square, right? Imagine like squaring your team and your team just runs it down, right? Uses square sort of like a brawl square instead of a spam square. You can do that. But the other way of also approaching like maps and understanding is the concept of actually sort of spamming more. Is spamming and like sort of like forcing point. Right? You have to realize that your comp in this situation has a lot of spam. And you don't always have to play to brawl. Right? You don't always have to do that. And you can force the enemy's hand by essentially, out spamming them and forcing point and force them into a brawl. So what I mean by this is how to do this is you want to set up your backline. For instance, you can probably ask your backline. There's probably a lot of places and a lot of situations where your BAP's not happy with LOS. Your McCree is not happy with LOS, and LOS is just absolute shit. For example, if you were to play like right over here, right, does your McCree like this LOS? It's like not amazing, right? Like that's sort of playing up there sort of sucks, right? Over here, sure, this LOS could be good, right? But like again, it's really risky, right? Like if you played like over, here, how's this LOS? It's still like pretty eh. If you played like over here, right, LOS eh. Right? So the concept now is set up the backline in an LOS which favors them, and you could poke the enemy team out while forcing point to force someone to go to point. Okay, so the concept first, for you to actually effectively force point, is you first need to force the cart to a one fight situation. Right? And if a very big example of this is if you ever know in watch point, right? A lot of people would be like, oh, can we force the cart like, under the bridge and a little bit up the stairs, right? And the reasoning for that is that that's one fight. Right? Right after you force the cart there, right? It not only forces the enemy team to back up, right? But once you go take high ground and win the high ground, right? It's one fight you can push cart and you just cap, right? But it also forces the enemy team to back up because of map geometry. So what I'm talking about here now is what you want to do is force this cart roughly over here, right? And then if you force cart here, if you win the fight, right? 3 people on cart, you cap, right? So what you do now is you force the cart sort of there, and then you sort of have your team play over here in this situation. Why? Because this is a really strong spot if you think about it, right? If the enemy team is playing over there, you play over here, you have a corner, they don't have a corner. You have a shield, they don't have a shield. You poke those guys out for free. If the enemy team is playing over there, right, maybe you rotate and you play this corner now, and you shield, right? And you sort of use the fact that you have corners and a shield and poke them out. And while that's happening, right, you look to sort of have someone move cart. And if you have a Mei, believe it or not, Mei is like self-sufficient, right? If anyone remembers Clockwork Vendetta, Mei could take one-on-ones. Mei's got cryo, you know, in heals because of cryo. Mei has wall. So essentially, Mei can go push cart by herself. And as long as the Mei is within LOS, right, of the team, so the BAP can help the Mei can slowly push cart and force somebody onto the cart, like the Winston. The Winston comes to cart, right, drops, everyone can go help the Mei, force the Winston to jump out, and then again, push the cart. Right, if you have a tracer, you can do the same concept where, you know, tracer goes, you know, you push cart, and then your team, the carts and the tracers and LOS of your team. So if they have send someone to cart, your team can help and force the person out, right? So you sort of set up your backline in a position where they can spam and get kills, right? Imagine just coming over here and you literally square instantly, right? Those guys are dead. There's no way. Okay, so that's sort of the logic, is playing to set up your backline. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about, and it's a mistake that a lot of people don't do correctly. If you have point control and you're looking to sort of, you know, set up, in general, sometimes holding high ground is really awkward, so, you know, your team doesn't do it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't look like you're holding high ground. So for instance, here you have point control, right? Blue team has point control. The last thing you want to do is let the whole enemy team, right, come over here, take this high ground, and let Winston's play right over here and just drop on you guys and jump back up, right? You want to make the Winston sort of work at it to get on you. You want to make it hard for this, like, the whole team. So what you can do is you can do a sort of split where you can send, you know, your Ryan, your Mei, and your Lucio. And these guys, right, will just soft hold this high ground here with the shield. So that if anyone does try and push that high ground, right, they're getting Mei shot, right? It's not like just free that they can just walk for free, right? And the rest of the people are sort of pushing cart, right? And eventually these guys aren't going to stay high ground. They're eventually going to drop, right, and join the team, right? Or maybe the team joins them, right? But essentially, the concept of just soft holding that high ground and applying pressure so the enemy team just can't walk and take it for free. This is a team that did this very, very well, was London. If anyone wants to really understand how to play Brawl versus Double Bubble, I highly suggest going and watching the London versus Steel Series match, versus London versus Glads, and I'll maybe do a review of it as well. But they played Brawl at like a macro, like immaculate level. It was like they played it so well macro-wise. It was very, very clear they understood what they were doing. Okay, so that's sort of the general concepts, right? So in total, right, we sort of talked about, you know, the 3 basic things. Right? We talked about, you know, how to sort of use corners to your advantage. Let's get a better background here. Whoops, there we go. Corners to your advantage. We talked about sort of the different, like, setting up backline. And we also talked about, like, running it down, which everyone knows. Running it down. And then we also talked about sort of like how you can use alts, right, to like push with that, because it puts pressure off the Ryan, it forces everyone to back up, and you can just take space for free, right? And the last one was like the soft holding. Whoops. I have a feeling this is actually gonna get messed up by my overlay, isn't it? Oh, it does. Here, put it up here. The alts and pushing, and then soft holding. Okay. There's definitely other concepts, like there's spawn holding. I might do a video on that because I think spawn holding is very fun and like very good. But this just hopefully should give you like a basic with win conditions and sort of like understand how to sort of approach fights a bit better. In terms of like a Mei versus Tracer, I'm just gonna say both are viable. If you're playing Mei, your Mei better be really good with Mei walls. And like understand how to like wall off the Ryan so he doesn't get on. He's walled off of heals and it's hard for him to back up or jump out. If you're playing Tracer, then Tracer should understand how to like play lanes and sort of like pinch and whatnot, and also double blink and like punish the Winston when he's jumping out with low HP, especially to a flat area. Okay, that is it. Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for all the support. Okay, chat questions. Go. City Center. Yeah, I don't know. It just wasn't in my. I couldn't think of it. Dora, thanks for the sub again. Do you have any opinion? No, the meta is literally this. The meta is 100% Brawl on some maps, Ball on maps where, you know, Ball where Winston sucks. There you go. This is the meta. You can literally play any composition, and like some people might just prefer, like, you know, you might be London or Paris and prefer to play only Brawl, and like it's a little suboptimal on some maps, but they can still pull it off because they're really good at Brawl. You might be a team that, like, you know, plays a lot more ball, you know, Winston comps, right? You might be a team that just plays ball comps, but in general, like, if you were to go by logic, right, it's like certain comps are more optimal on certain maps, right? But obviously based off your hero pool and, you know, what you're good at, you know, you sort of need to go from there.